Audience. Okay, over to you, Sue.
Okay, hello. My name's Sue Paterson, and I'm speaking on behalf of a group called HOFWIG, which stands for Hill of Fare Windfarm Information Group. And I'm going to talk about justice in transition, particularly with respect to the Hill of Fare Windfarm. And this is the outline of the talk. I'm going to give a little introduction and then just talk about what is a just transition, talk about what's happening at the Hill of Fare, and then government needs, developer and landowner needs, and community needs. And then ask the question, is this a just transition? And what should a just transition look like? And I'll end with what can you do? And very provocatively, Kate Forbes' 3 questions. So what is a just transition? For us, we think for a transition to be just, there's got to be a balance between the needs of key stakeholders. And in this case, it's the government, business, and community. Everyone participates and everyone has an equal say and everyone benefits. So this picture of 3 balanced dishes on the right. So what's happening at the Hill of Fare? The blue box on the top left says the developer called RES, which is Renewable Energy Systems, and the Connected Estate, they're proposing a wind farm on the top of the Hill of Fare. The Hill of Fare is an isolated hill. It's surrounded by densely populated rural area. Within 15 kilometres, according to the census, 45,000 people live, and it's covered by over 20 community councils. Now, on the right, in sort of pale yellow, when you build a wind farm, it's not just the turbines, there's a whole load of ancillary equipment around it. This particular development has 16 turbines, 180 to 200 metres tall. It's 105 megawatts. I need to move this, sorry, I can't see my slides, which is really offshore capacity. Sorry. Oops. That's it. So the Hill of Fare, the top of the Hill of Fare is about 400 metres high, and the surrounding land is 400 metres above sea level, and the surrounding land is about 200 metres above sea level. So the elevation of the hill is 200 metres, roughly, give or take. So these turbines will actually more or less double the height of the hill, and they'll be visible a long, long way away. You'll probably be able to see it in Aberdeen. So you'll need concrete foundations and bases for the turbines and the cranes that are needed to lift the turbines up. And these concrete foundations need to be very big, because if it's windy, you don't want these 200-metre tall turbines falling over. And they're each about an acre. There'll need to be quarries on the hill. They're called borrow pits, but they're actually quarries, and blasting 2 to 3 times a week for 6 months in order to get the material to build the foundations and the roads. There'll need to be a battery storage area and substation, and there'll need to be access roads that are wide enough to allow the 200-metre tall turbines up the hill. Once the wind farm is generating, then the electricity needs to be transported with pylons, but we don't know what that route's going to be, because the planning for that comes after this application. It's a separate application. And RES are suggesting that this wind farm has a 50 years life. So it's likely that there'll be repowering and renewal of the wind farm. And the box on the left, red box, the impacts include obviously landscape and visual, health for people living around the hill, including noise, flicker, the effect of blasting and so on private water supplies, microplastics pollution and night lights, impact on the biodiversity. Nesbret reckons there's 51 species living on the hill, so their habitats are going to be affected, and there are migrating birds. And the top of the hill, where some of the turbines are going to be put, is an area of Class 1 peat. This is what it looks like. So this is a view from Torfins. There's the elevation of the hill, and you can see these things more or less double the size of the hill. This is from the cowsheds just outside Bankery. These are pictures from a bit further away. This is from Curlock. Here's Banchory in the valley here. Curlock is not far from Scolty, so that's really what you'd see when you climb up Scolty. And the Dee Valley, actually the Hill of Fare is the northern boundary. The Dee Valley is an SLA, which is a special landscape area. So this will be seen over the whole SLA here. And this is the view at West Hill, the Carney roundabout. So if you're coming from Aberdeen to Banchory, that would be your first view of the outlier of the Cairngorms. So let's look at what the government needs are. The first need is they need to produce renewable energy. It's really good. And I would say that their needs are met. Currently, wind generation in Scotland is 11 gigawatts. Consumption is 3.5, and the grid transmission capacity is 4.5. On windy days, the surplus is exported to England, but because the grid capacity is not as big as the 11 gigawatts, some of the wind farms have to be closed in. That's called curtailment, and wind is curtailed at the moment for about 150 days a year. What happens when a wind farm is curtailed? The developer and landowner gets paid curtailment payments, and that comes from our utility bills. Now, the Scottish Government has set ambitious targets for wind generation. They've set a generation target of almost 3 times what it is now, that's 30 gigawatts. They're expecting the consumption to rise to about 10, about 3 times what it is now. And that's assuming that everyone's got an electric vehicle and there's 1 million homes with heat pumps. There's still a massive surplus on windy days. It's not windy every day. This is really important. And that surplus is expected or is planned to be exported to England and or Europe. However, the grid as it is absolutely not capable of doing it. And to increase the capacity of the grid is a really huge major project, particularly to get up to these sorts of numbers. So what that means is there will be a significant increase in curtailment. The good news is Scotland's wind generation targets are on track. If you look at the table to the right, the bottom line says 2030 target, 20 for onshore wind, and the line above it says currently, if you include under construction, awaiting construction, and in planning, the total exceeds that target already. So it's 22.1 gigawatts onshore, and offshore it's also exceeding the target. So the really good news is that the Scottish Government can afford to be choosy and pick the most suitable locations for wind farms. What other needs do we think they have? I think they need to keep control. So the National Planning Framework 4 has made a rule that anything, major projects over 50 megawatts, which this is, will be decided by the Energy Consents Unit based in Edinburgh. So that means that local councils, community councils, Aberdeenshire Council, they're consultees, they're not decision makers. The other thing the government needs to do is keep up the pace. So MPF4 has said that all wind farms will be approved if impacts are mitigated. And that's up for interpretation, of course, except if they are in a national park or special landscape area. And the Hill of Fare, as I've said, is just on the northern boundary of an SLA. What's clear, however, is that there's no national plan or framework to make these decisions. Proposals come along, they're assessed, they're approved or rejected individually. It's ad hoc, it's a free-for-all, and it's not controlled. So I'm a bit worried about that, to be honest. Another need the government has is to reduce carbon emissions, and we're a bit worried that this need may not be met. There's significant peat removal, tree felling, and concrete, which means significant carbon emissions. And although the developer says they're paid back in a very short time, we're concerned that the calculation is actually flawed. Then finally, reversing biodiversity loss. Again, we're worried that this need may not be met. There's a large number of species on the hill. It's an important migration path for geese. The water from the hill flows into the River Dee, and if it's polluted, that's a big problem. And I think it's difficult to ensure that there'll be a net biodiversity gain. Let's look at the, sorry, how do I go back? Yeah. Let's look at the developer and landowner needs. Well, obviously, they want to develop the assets that they have to create jobs and profit, and that need is going to be very much met. We estimate, and this is an estimate, that this wind farm will generate over £20 million income a year. That's income, it's not profit, so it's before costs. But if you consider this is a 50-year project, it's seriously profitable. Both RES and Dunacty Estate are big businesses. RES is part of a large multinational company, and Dunacty Estate is one of the largest privately owned estates in Aberdeenshire. And what has happened before, historically, RES has sold on wind farms once built for a profit. So it's not at all certain that they will keep operating the wind farm. We don't know who that will be. And secondly, they want to make sure this application is successful. They've worked very, very hard. They have a large number of professional paid people to do the work and to write the reports. And they've been lobbying the government. They were on the team that worked up the onshore wind sector deal. One of the issues that is trying to deal with is planning time. They want to streamline the planning time, which we're concerned means less and less community input. Okay, let's have a quick look at the community's aspects. There are 6 community councils around the hill, about 11,000 people. In October 2022, RES had proposed 17 turbines, 250 metres tall. By June 2023, this was reduced by 1 turbine to 16, and the height was reduced from 180 to 200 metres tall, and that's what it is now. So RES had consultations in October 22 and June 23, and the 6 community councils together and ran surveys, questionnaires, alongside the RES consultations in order to have an independent view and inform the community councils of the views of the community. So the results of the survey are on the left here. The top one is October 22 and June 23 after the small reduction in number of turbines and height. And if I just draw your attention to the bottom line, 71% objected after the October 22 consultation, with 11% in favour. And after June 23, when things were smaller, 75% objected, with 11% still in favour, and the balance being either undecided or neutral. So let's have a look at community needs. We think it's very important that we have local democracy, and we don't think that is met. The local council is only a consultee, not a decision maker. There's more than 20 community councils within 15 kilometres of this thing. And communities, I think, are generally underrepresented. And it's very, very difficult to reach the many spread out rural communities, to tell them what's happening, to get the information to them so that they can make up their own minds whether for or against. It's very difficult to do that. There's no newsletter. You have to rely on word of mouth or Facebook or all that kind of thing. It's really difficult. We've been given 4 weeks to respond to the application over the Christmas period. So that cuts out 2 weeks really. And the report is highly technical. It's 600 pages. And obviously we're a limited number of amateur volunteers and we have no money. This is a serious imbalance. Economic benefit, we don't think that is met either. RES themselves have said that there are a few local jobs generated, and then only during the 2-year construction period. The Just Transition proposal from the government says that there should be retraining or education offers. There are none. RES have offered a community benefit. It is the statutory minimum, which is £5,000 a megawatt per year. And that has not changed since it was first proposed. I can't remember when, but several years ago, and it's not index linked. There are 11,000 people in the 6 community councils, Banbury being the largest one. And if you spread that out to everybody, that equates to about £45 per person per year. And if you compare that to the very rough income that we think is coming is about 3%. We know that more wind farms means higher constraints payments when there's no wind, and that means higher utility bills. And finally, the local investment, inward investment that Res has quoted, they quote big numbers, but actually what they don't say is it's for the whole lifetime of the project, that's 50 years. So they say Aberdeenshire Council will get 50 million business rates, but over 50 years, that's roughly £1 million a year. And I believe that the community council budget is something like 700 million. So £1 million a year is not really significant. Bit more on community needs. We want to preserve this beautiful landscape, nature and amenities. Someone who lives very near the hill wanted me to highlight to you that residents will have extreme adverse impact 24/7. Health implications, there's the noise issue, light flicker, especially at this time of year if you live on the north side of the hill, contamination or disruption of private water supplies, microplastics pollution from blades getting into those water supplies, and permanent night lights. So, is this a just transition? It's not very balanced, is it? The government is focused on capacity and targets and pace, that's good. But there's no joined up plan, and they're not really taking into account the longer term or the consequences on communities. Landowners and developers make few sacrifices, but they've got significant benefits. And communities in rural areas sacrifice the most, with no meaningful benefits and no say. So we would conclude this is not a just transition. So what does a just transition look like? We think renewables are an essential part of the energy transition. There needs to be a balance between all these key stakeholders. Everyone participates and has an equal say. We think large wind farms should be placed offshore or in brownfield industrial sites. We think onshore wind should have a proper integrated plan based on clear need and integrated with England too, by the way. It should progress at a pace that allows the right decisions to be made for the right developments in the right place. It should be supported by local communities, properly benefiting them if they are impacted. It should have community participation and potentially ownership. And it should preserve our beautiful landscape and nature for future generations and visitors. So what's next? You can find out more from the ECU website, Energy Consents Unit, the RES website, the Hofwig website, the NAFA website, and Facebook pages. But more importantly, have your say, whatever it is, whether you support it or not. The deadline is the 12th of January, and you need to write to both the Energy Consents Unit and all your local councillors. This is local democracy. This is how you get your say. You need to provide the date, your name, your email or postal address, and quote the name of the project on all correspondence, which is Hill of Fare Windfarm application, ECU 00004592, and you can see it on the ECU website. We need help. If you want to get involved, please get in touch. We need help with engagement, admin, legal, planning, fundraising, everything. And I just want to end with what Kate Forbes said recently about a wind farm development on Skye. She said, my 3 questions about wind farm proposals are, do they primarily serve local people or shareholders? Are local people by a majority in favour or opposed? Does the development hinder or develop, in this case Skye's, future prosperity? If the answer to all of those favours external companies rather than local people, then I cannot be in favour. I think that's very wise. Thank you for listening.